What's up, folks? Tim Anderson here, aka Rivendell. Welcome back to another episode of Mondays in Middle-earth as we continue our adventures through the realms of Tolkien, and specifically The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion as we lead up to the Rings of Power so that we can properly mock the show for the travesty that it is. Or maybe, just maybe, and the chances of this are so remote, it's unthinkable. It might be a show that is good enough for us to enjoy because when Peter Jackson's films came out, a lot of people poked and pulled and prodded at all the various threads and made lots of objections to things that they thought were bad, and the movies came out and they were universally loved. So we'll see. In any case, today's episode, I got actually getting on my phone because most of my notes are here on the phone. Um, we are diving into the first two chapters of Book 2 of The Fellowship of the Ring. Now, I previously had made a prediction that each episode was going to cover like 3 to 4 chapters, because that's kind of what I did through the first few parts. However, in this part, we're only covering the first 2 chapters in The Fellowship of the Ring. Let me pull this up real quick. Dun, 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 dun. The reason being that the Council of Elrond chapter was way too dense, and it took me like 4 different reading sessions to get through it all. So we're going to be covering Book 2, Chapter 1, Mini Meetings, as well as Book 2, Chapter 2, The Council of Elrond. That's what we're going through in today's video. Now, this will probably be a significantly longer episode compared to previous entries because the Council of Elrond chapter was so dense. There's a lot of lore being dumped in that chapter as it pertains to the ring. And so I took a bunch of notes. So we'll see how much longer it is. It might not be. I might get through it, and speed read it, but give ourselves time today. Don't forget, episodes come out every Monday at 11 a.m. Central here on YouTube. So if you like this video, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so that you can continue to get updates in this series as we continue to read through. And also, huge request, make sure to join as a member and subscribe here as a member to support the channel financially. You can get in for $3 a month, or if you like to read and you would prefer to get something a little bit extra for your money as opposed to just YouTube content, you can go over to the Patreon page for that project behind me, The World of the Weave and the Void, where I am building that IP with my brother and my wife, as well as the Nathan Napalm. It is a 5th edition tabletop setting. There is a book series and a point and click game. You can find more information right over there, and you can join for as little as $3 a month there as well. So, hopefully, you'll pick up a subscription one way or the other, support the channel, support the content. Let's dive in and read through. So, first up in the mini meetings chapter, this is after the Ford of Brennan, and Frodo awakens in the House of Elrond. Probably the most notable aspect of this chapter for me is Bilbo's poem. When he's reading the tale of Arendil, the half-elven mariner who voyaged to Valinor, treated before the Valar on behalf of the children of Ilúvatar, and carried a star across the sky at the end of the first age. This is a pretty cool moment, and it's another chapter that showcases the depth of the mythology that Tolkien had built as a backdrop with the Legendarium and etc. For the Lord of the Rings. This is also when we get the moment that a lot of people love from the film, when Bilbo basically asks to see the ring again, and Frodo feels this reluctance at showing him the ring, and when he does, he sees before him Bilbo as a golem-like creature and recoils from him. Uh, that's a moment that was exceptionally well done in the films. I feel like it's equal to the scene in The Prancing Pony when we first get the reveal of Aragorn, and we have that, the embers burning in his pipe, and we get his face lighting up beneath the cloak. This is one of those visual moments that they pulled off very well in the films, and it's a great visual representation of what Frodo felt at this moment, because just seeing this creature and like, I don't, and that's a moment where he saw, kind of the ring is affecting both Frodo and Bilbo in the same moment here. It's pretty interesting, and it just goes to show you the sort of the beginning tendrils that are working their way into Frodo's heart and mind. It's pretty cool stuff here. We also get lots and lots of lore from Gandalf, indulging Frodo, asking him from the bed, hey, you know what happened, etc. Despite the fact that Elrond had said, hey, don't tell him anything. We have a council coming up. Gandalf kind of said, I'm going to tell him things anyway, and gave him a story, which is very cool. We also see Arwen for the first time, and we are told about her beauty, um, and we see Aragorn close to her. Now, we don't really get anything beyond that. It's just sort of like a this moment where we see them together, and knowing what we know now of things that have happened later in the book, we know that they are romantically involved. But if excuse me, if I had been reading this for the first time, it is so subtly mentioned here that you would really have to be drawing at straws to make an assumption that they were romantically involved. Um, but knowing what we know from the films and from the books and everything else, obviously, there is a romantic connection that is been shown in the films more than it was in the books, but it's definitely here at the core of the books as well if you read through the appendices and later on we find out more, especially when we find out about Aragorn spending so much time in his youth living in Lothlorien. Um, Great stuff. Anyway, it's kind of foreshadowing here. And we get told, that she is the most beautiful elven maiden that anyone's seen since Luthien. So, where she's been reborn, basically, in essence, is what we're told in the text. We learn more about the richness of the culture that is Rivendell and the fact that Rivendell protects against the evils beyond, with the sons of Elrond, riding out and defending the territory. We also hear more about, um, what Aragorn does, what the Rangers do as well. Gandalf also explains more about Glorfindel and who Glorfindel is, and that the white figure that Frodo perceived at the fords on the other side that was chasing the ringwraiths into the river was in fact Glorfindel in all of his glory revealed, confronting the ringwraiths and chasing them into the water. Of course, the flaming brands being the other characters having torches and following along Glorfindel. But this is when we get an inkling of Glorfindel being this really badass who is not afraid to stand up to these ringwraiths, and he's frightful enough in his own right that the ringwraiths flee before him. Part of that was probably, in my mind, timing, because they weren't all they thought they were going to cross the river, then all of a sudden they're finding themselves facing powerful foes on all fronts. We've got Gandalf on one side, the power of Rivendell just beyond the river, and on the other side, we've got Glorfindel and of course Aragorn. And feeling all of that pressure, they fled before him. Cool stuff. All right, let me get my phone open here because I got my notes here. Because now we're getting into the next chapter, the Council of Elrond. I got a whole bunch of stuff here. All right, so first up, we have Glowen recounting the moment when the servants of Sauron, or the servant, I should say, of Sauron, arrived at the gates of the Lonely Mountain, offering them 3 of the dwarven rings of old and Moria in exchange for. I feel like Donald Trump at this point. Like, we have to do this with a Donald Trump voice. It's just a ring, a one ring, a tiny ring, the smallest of rings. It's a trinket, really. I don't know. Maybe if you find it, you could get it back for us because it's just a small thing. It's a treasure. Sauron wants it, and in exchange, yeah, we could make a deal. He could give you the Moria and 3 of the rings of Dwarven range. But it's not a big deal. It's just a small ring. It's just a trinket, really. Well, what do you say? Like, I feel like that's how this servant of Sauron approach the dwarves, because in the text literally he's talking about, you know Lawrence explaining to him that he's just it's a little trinket, it's nothing more than a trifle. um, but they do mention that it's this hobbit thief who stole it, and we'd like it back from him if you could. um, and it also, the way it's described then, that the dwarves are like, well, that's really it's none of our business. um, and maybe or maybe not, like, we're not, we can't commit to anything. And the mouth of Sauron here, in this case, this servant of Sauron, basically saying, well, don't wait too long, because if you do, you're going to face the wrath of Mordor. So it started off as a friendly conversation of, hey, if you find this ring, could you give it to us, to the dwarf saying, well, that's really none of our business. this little trinket thing, and the guy saying, well, if you come across it, you really should. It's in your best interests. Because if you don't, and they're like, what? What are you going to do? And then he threatens them, and they're like, you know what? Piss off. It's very interesting. Just to show you that the desperation of Sauron is starting to come into play here, but he's also still trying to use his old tricks, seductive words and negotiation. I'll give you this in exchange for that. I'll also give you Moria because he's using the things that he knows the dwarves crave in an attempt to seduce them. But the elves don't fall prey to this. Dwarves can still be manipulated a little bit, but the elves have seen through his lies. They've already been deceived once before. I did not remember that Elrond was the son of Arendelle. I did not. There's a whole lot more to that story in the myths and legends of other books. Um, from what I understand in my reading online, I'm gonna want to dig into that more after I finish reading through these books because that fact I'd forgotten it completely. I also do not remember very much who is Arendelle. Like we get a glimpse of him through the poem, and I did some online research about who he was and what he did and et cetera, and the trials and tribulations sailing with the Silmaril. Very cool stuff. I did not remember him being Elrond's father. Um, so that's extracurricular reading for when I get done with all this stuff. We're back again to travel. I have more notes in here about the length of travel. It took Boromir 110 days to reach Rivendell on horseback, right? That's something that the movies, again, I've mentioned this in multiple episodes before, that the travel times are significantly shortened in the films, which they have to be. But even I had forgotten that it took Boromir 110 days to ride from Gondor, to ride from Minas Tirith um, to Rivendell. And I don't know how much of that time was him spent maybe getting lost trying to find the entrance to Rivendell. But it's a long journey. That's more than 3 months. I mean, that's a good chunk of time to spend in the saddle, riding across the countryside, looking for a place you'd never been to before and only heard myths and legends about. It just goes to show you too the desperation of the men of Gondor and the sack of balls that Boromir has on him to have undertaken this journey without knowing whether he was going to find the destination or not. Really interesting stuff here. Um, I have a note in here about Strider's speech to Boromir when he tells them about how Gondor may have kept the East safe. Yeah, this is Strider basically reminding Boromir that you might be in the city of Minas Tirith, but my people, the Dunedain, have been protecting the borders um, for years. We've upheld our end. This is very interesting. And he basically gives him a speech. He gives Boromir a speech about how Gondor may have kept the East safe, but the Dunedain have kept the rest of the world safe. Um, Especially, and this is a point because it's like a source of pride for Aragorn because he says, and yet we have less. He says, yet less thanks have we than you. In other words, people at least know that Gondor protects the East, and you're a prince of Gondor, and people give you the recognition. I do it without recognition. He says, I do it, and yet less thanks have we than you. Travelers scowl at us, and countrymen give us scornful names. Strider I am to one fat man who lives within a day's march of foes that would freeze his heart and lay his little town in ruin if he were not guarded ceaselessly. So this is Aragorn's, kind of with a point of pride stepping up again. Hey man, you might think I'm some backwoods, country boy in my ragged clothes and everything else, but my people have kept the entire world safe while you've been hidden up in your little white city. Yes, you've been defending the east against borders of Mordor, but we've been out in the real world doing real world stuff. So it's kind of, Gondor, Boromir's making these prideful speeches, and Aragorn is saying, take it back a little, tone it down a notch, buddy, because we've been doing stuff that you have no clue about. Gandalf gives a very long speech here, um, regarding the passing of this. It took them 17 years. This was something that I had also forgotten. 17 years to hunt Gollum. In the course of hunting Gollum and then riding to Gondor to read the scroll that Isildur had written regarding the writing on the band of the ring, um, 17 years was that entire period of time. Um, that also is like it's just not even mentioned in the film that it took that long. I'd completely forgot that it took that long. There's also this recounting of the meeting with Radagast and how the Brown Wizard almost never traveled unless great need was upon him, and he had left the forest to seek Gandalf in the Shire to talk about how the Nazgul were on the ride again and how the Nine had crossed the river and were moving westward in the guise of Black Riders. And then this leads into the section where um, Gandalf says that he doesn't think Radagast has been corrupted by Saruman's lies because Radagast is without guile, and he was honest and sincere. And immediately, as soon as he delivered the message, he was like, "I'm back to my woods." Like he was literally thought that the need was so dire that he sought Gandalf out and then retreated back to his woods, and that was the manipulation of Saruman at work to draw Gandalf into the trap. I love how Gandalf, even in his moment of like, I'm about to get trapped, right? Saruman is lording over him about how he was Saruman of many colors and all this other stuff. And Gandalf gives this snarky reply about, I liked white better. It's just like, I forgot how much humor there was in these books and how Gandalf isn't afraid to like give off sarcastic replies, which we mentioned that in the Hobbit read through. There's moments when Gandalf loses his cool with the dwarves, and Bilbo also loses his cool with the dwarves. But this is really funny when Gandalf's, I liked white better. When Gandalf is riding the eagles to Edoras, they are discussing things, and they mention the men of Rohan send a tribute of horses to Mordor every year, but are not yet under the yoke. Aragorn then comments that it was not so the last time he was in Rohan, and this is something I had forgotten as well, and they definitely don't mention in the movies, is that Rohan may not have fallen under the sway of Mordor, but to stave off war because they weren't capable of, they didn't want to fight this battle. They didn't want to go into war against Mordor. They had begun to pay tribute in horses. Um, Aragorn didn't know that. It hadn't been that way the last time he was there, which goes to show you the manipulation of Sauron already at play, even long before we've even gotten to Rohan and we know all of what's going on, which happens in the Two Towers. We get an inkling of this here in the Council of Elrond. Elrond then laments the constant fleeing of the elves and says that they must now take the hard road, the road unforeseen, to walk into peril. He basically criticizes his own people for um, running to the west and disappearing and sailing across the sea to go live in their precious little heaven when they leave the rest of the world to suffer. Um, it's a short speech, but it is a very important moment because it's Elrond basically telling the elves that they need to man up and face this foe. Vormer has a low-key insult in this chapter. He says that maybe the sword that was broken may still stem the tide, but only if the hand that wields it has inherited not an heirloom, but the sinews of the kings of men. So he basically sits there and goes, we need to make sure that that hand that wields it inherited not an heirloom only, but the sinews of the kings of men. So do you also have the strength of Numenor in your bloodline, or is that just a toy sword that you wear around for show? Low-key insult. Um, Aragorn takes it on the chin, which is it's very interesting. We're seeing the true character of Aragorn here. Um, Glowen pushes for the knowledge of the three rings of the elves, and Elrond and the rest of the elf lords won't speak of the three rings. And I assume this is to avoid Sauron ever knowing who wields them, because up until this point they had remained untainted by Sauron. But they won't even talk about it. It's like as soon as Glowen pushes them to say, "Hey, what about the three rings? Why can't we use those to face Sauron?" And poof, everybody clams up and gets silent. Um, and this is something else I'd forgotten. Bilbo actually is the first person to step up and offer to take the ring to destroy it. and he considers himself responsible after having discovered the ring in the first place, and says, "Hey, I guess, guys, I found it. It's my fault. I'm the one who brought it back from underneath the mountain, so one last journey, one last hurrah." And of course, everyone tells him to sit down, shut up, you're old, you can't do it. And then we get to, Frodo standing up and saying, I'll do it. You know, he feels compelled. So this is just a really, in my mind, a lore-heavy chapter. We get a lot of stuff in here that can lead to extracurricular reading, whether it's learning more about Arwen, learning more about Arendelle, the father of Elrond, learning more about Elrond's legacy and his history as well, because he talks a lot about, I was there at the beginning. I was the herald for Gilgalad, and there's a lot of history here if you want to use that as a jumping off place, which I know some of it because, or at least I remember vaguely some of it. I don't remember hard like numbers and things like Elrond was 7,229 years old, and when the ring was cut from Sauron's finger, he was 2,723 and a half. Like I don't know those types of things, but I do vaguely remember his role in history. But I had completely forgotten about who his dad was as a namesake, as an example, and the story of his dad I completely forgot about, and I read some brief stuff on the internet, but that's not enough to really understand that tale. So, more reading for me. Yay! So that concludes today's episode. So we weren't a ton longer. It's not like we hit 30 minutes or anything, but a little over 20 minutes today. Hopefully you enjoyed this next entry into the Fellowship of the Ring. Obviously, we're continuing onwards. The next chapter will be out next Monday. These episodes come out every Monday at 11 a.m. Central Time. Don't forget, there is a specific channel set up in our Discord server. Links are down below for those of you who want to come have greater conversations about this and discuss things and so on and so forth, or if you're reading through this at the same time. Check that channel out, and we'll talk more there. You can also drop comments down here in the video, of course. Like it, subscribe, hit the bell icon, all good things. And if you would, I would love it if you could join as a member here on YouTube. It's a great way of showing support for the content that you consume on a regular basis. And if you would like to, you can also head over to the Patreon page for the World of the Weave and the Void. It's patreon.com/Wandering Hermits. The Wandering Hermits being myself, my brother, and I. Chapters for the book come out twice a month. If you like Dragonlance style stuff, cool. That's what that's like. The tabletop books are out in June of 2022. You can pre-order those today. The point and click game, you can download the demo and pre-order that. That's out later this year. But there's various tiers and everything else, so check that stuff out. So hopefully we'll see you in Discord and over on Patreon and definitely in the next episode here on YouTube, everybody. Thanks so much. Happy reading. Stay safe.